Recording, understanding and disseminating information on the buildings of Wales has been at the heart of the work of the Royal Commission since our inception in 1908. The Architecture Archives within the National Monuments Record plays a vital role of two parts in that work, both in curating the work that's created by the survey and investigation team during thematic research or emergency recording work, and in collecting wider archives about the buildings of Wales that can be used for further research and interpretation. With such a wealth of information available, it would be impossible for me today to cover everything, so I'm just going to focus on some of our collections relating to 20th century architecture. The first category is that archive relating directly to architects and architectural practices themselves. One of the earliest 20th century collections we have is that of the North West Wales-based architect Herbert Luck North. North, who worked from his base in Llanfairfechan between 1901 and 1941, was one of the last proponents of the arts and crafts movement, having been inspired by the likes of J.D. Sedding and Edwin Lutyens. His earliest buildings are his houses in the close Llanfairfechan, which show the interest that he had in incorporating the distinctive vernacular traditions of North West Wales into the arts and crafts medium, as well as ideas that he was developing from the garden village movement of the time in layout, landscape design and grouping. He was also a man of deeply religious beliefs, and it was the work that he did for the church which most inspired North, including the church hostel chapel in Bangor, seen here on the right-hand side, which is a hidden gem of a building accessed down a short alley, sadly now closed for worship and used as a store. His most constant employers was St Winifred's School, where he built schoolrooms, a school hall, a chapel, a music wing and a sanatorium, all between 1922 and 1937. He was known as Pa North to the children, and in return he built them rooms flooded with light and enlivened with quirky detailing. Unfortunately, this whole complex was demolished in the 1970s, and these archives are all that remain to record his work here. In the second half of the 20th century, the Percy Thomas Partnership was one of the largest and commercially successful practices in Wales, designing buildings such as the fantastic British nylon spinners factory Pontypool. The practice's biggest mark was perhaps made in their work with the university buildings. Everdale Owen, a Merthyr-born architect who, after studying at the Welsh School of Architecture at Cardiff, spent a year working under Walter Gropius in the US, joined the practice in 1958. He went on to design some of the most iconic Welsh buildings of the second half of the 20th century, many of which are covered by the collections in our archive. Owen was particularly involved with the creating of the new architectural identities of many of Wales's universities, and the National Monuments Record holds a particularly fine collection relating to his work of the Penglais campus of Aberystwyth. Percy Thomas himself had originally carried out the designs of the campus in the 1930s, but due to the intervention of the Second World War, only 3 of his buildings were completed. The main scheme was therefore reworked by Owen from 1964, with the new design consisting of a series of long low blocks that could terrace down the hillside parallel to the contours, joined together by careful planting schemes designed by James Ingleby and Brenda Colving, amongst others. The nucleus of the scheme is the Library and Arts Complex, built between 1970 and 1972, with its geometrically simple but monumental facade overlooking a spacious piazza dominated by the bell tower, which acts as both a visual reference point and as a heating flue, as seen in this wonderful photograph from the Central Office of Information Collection, which I'll return to a little bit later. BBC Broadcasting House Llandaff, described as one of the finest post-war buildings in Cardiff and among the finest ones in a modernist idiom in Wales, was also designed by Owen. As a key building in our work on understanding 20th century architecture, and as one which has been approved for demolition, it's been important to bring together as complete an archive as possible to record the story of a complex which was built between 1963 and 1967, and included an administration block, sound studios, music studios, a restaurant pavilion, TV studios and a social club. In this instance, images from the original architect's practice archive have been substantially supplemented by archive material held by the BBC themselves and scanned by the Royal Commission. This has included plans and sections charting the different phases of construction and development, detailed sketches for fittings, and photographs of the building when new, which particularly accentuate a design which makes each element of the interior, immediately identifiable on the exterior. The admin block, the sound studio and the television studios, all advanced and treated differently, using a limited palette of concrete and natural materials. Alongside this, we ourselves carried out an extensive photographic recording of the exteriors and interiors to create an archive of Broadcasting House as it existed in 2017. This recording work included working in partnership with the BBC on an interactive resource, charting the building in a 360-degree tour with embedded interviews, archive clips and videos, capturing the stories of the people and processes that make up the narrative of this architecturally and historically important building. All of this information charting the story of BBC Wales will also be held in our archives for future research and reference. The Central Office of Information, mentioned briefly already, was created in 1946 to work across different government departments on campaigns and general publicity and marketing around important governmental issues and policies of the day, from health and education to benefits, rights and welfare. The National Monuments Record holds some 800 items originating with the COI, recording new civic buildings and offices, such as the Royal Mint Llantrisant, by renowned architects Frederick Gibbard and Partners, which opened in 1968 to provide new currency for the impending decimalisation, and the first Welsh office building in Cardiff, originally built in 1936 for the Board of Health. The COI documented the rapidly changing city centres of Swansea, Newport and Cardiff, all undergoing major reconstruction in the post-war period, with new ideas of city planning, pedestrianised high streets and shopping centres, and high-rise office blocks, as well as new transport developments in rail, such as the Queen Street railway station in Cardiff, and road, in particular the Severn Bridge, a monumental feat of engineering to create a suspension span of nearly 1,000 metres, which opened in 1966. Smaller scale but equally important developments in new building across Wales were also documented, from schools to places of worship, including here the Alice Street Mosque, which was rebuilt in the late 1970s after the taking of this photograph, and Our Lady of the Woods Catholic Church, Betws-y-Coed, built in 1961 but since converted for domestic use. And leisure buildings. Here the Wales Empire Pool, Cardiff, opened for the 1958 British Empire and Commonwealth Games by Cardiff City architect John Dryber, and the Royal Sun Centre by Gilson Barnett and Partners, and opened in 1980 with Europe's largest indoor surfing pool. Both of these complexes have now been demolished to make way for later developments. The COI also recorded many campaigns around new housing schemes, such as this 1980s housing development by Newport Borough Technical Services Department, and home improvement grants given to upgrade the facilities in early council houses, particularly in the provision of modern kitchens and bathrooms. Founded in 1919, Aerofilms Limited was an unprecedented business venture to use the new power of flight to charter the changing face of the UK through photography, garnering new strength after the Second World War, when it set about to play its part in world reconstruction. Much of their work was commissioned by industry, keen to show off their new building projects to the best advantage for advertising purposes, such as the wonderful Art Deco frontage of Morgan Rees & Sons Wireworks, Cardiff, opened in 1931 and now demolished, and the Trausfynydd Nuclear Power Station, designed by Basil Spence and constructed between 1959 and 1963, here showing the newly finished distinctive reactor buildings. They also covered many new housing schemes. These are just two images of the Gare Stelvio estate, Newport, taken at different phases of a modernist scheme by Johnson Blackett to house some 3,900 people in a combination of pairs and terraces of houses, flats, schools and shops, remarkable in the way that it utilises the contours of the steeply sloping site. And they documented the changing face of Wales's tourism industry, as shown by these two images of the adjacent resorts of Rhyl, an established seaside resort, and Kinmel Bay on the North Wales coast, home to the new Palins holiday camp. As a statutory consultee on listed building applications, the Royal Commission receives copies of hundreds of applications for alteration or demolition of listed buildings each year. The plans, drawings and photographs provided as part of the LBC application is added to our archive as an important record of the building, particularly in cases where demolition is due to take place. One such example was the Bryn Mawr rubber factory, built between 1945 and 1951 to designs by the Architects Co-Partnership by Ove Arup and Partners. The first post-war building to be listed in Wales at Grade 2 star, application for demolition was approved and carried out in 2001. Our emergency buildings recording collection includes drawings of the factory supplemented by our own photographic record, as well as documentation of the scheme planned to replace the factory. Finally, many of our collections relate to the work of the Commission's own buildings investigators and photographers across a wide range of projects. The most rapid surveys are carried out in response to threat of demolition and dereliction and cover a wide range of buildings, many held in our site files, folders packed full of images and research and categorised by building type. These black and white prints relate to the Prestatyn holiday camp opened in 1939, developed jointly by the London, Midland and Scottish Railway Company and Thomas Cook. A 58-acre site with a dining room that could accommodate nearly 2,000 people in one sitting, it was considered a very upmarket establishment, with luxury chalets overseen by the 60-foot Hamlin Tower. Requisitioned during the war, it returned in force, but was badly affected, like much else, by the downturn in the British holiday market of the 1960s, and sadly was eventually demolished in 2001 when we took these photographs. These pre-digital photographic surveys included colour slides as well as black and white prints, as shown here in a photographic survey of the post-war prefabs on the Bishoppool estate, Newport, one of the largest builders of prefab housing in the late 1940s. Taken before demolition of the final examples in 2004, the photographs document a now disappeared way of life in these ergonomically designed homes, often beloved by their owners. Recording interior fixtures and furnishings, which are far more open to alteration as owners change and with less protection by listing, is particularly important for our archiving work. These domestic interiors are at Little Orchard, Dinas Powys, an important scheme of 6 houses by Thomas Glyn Jones and John R. Evans, one of which survived almost intact in its original interior design in 2006. The architectural archive produced in-house is now all digital, and new technologies are giving us the capacity to record buildings in new and more complete ways. At Shire Hall, Mold, the monumentally iconic home of Clwyd County Council, and now Flintshire Council, a recent recorded has included hundreds of digital photographs recording the exterior and interior of the complex. Using a drone, however, we have also been able to take a series of images from the air, subsequently stitched together in photogrammetric software. That has produced a 3-dimensional model that replicates the exterior form of the building, but also its setting in relation to the landscape and adjacent buildings, substantially enhancing our future archive of this site. Our archive also includes digital resources that not only record a site in its setting as it exists during recording, but reconstructions of how it appeared originally. A bont, a sculpture by North Walian artist Jonah Jones, was commissioned by Coleg Harlech for its new student accommodation block in 1969. By 2009, when it was due to be moved, it had lost both its original background and some of its pieces. Through digital metric survey, research, 3D modelling and digital reconstruction, we were able to produce a short animated film that shows the sculpture in context, including with its lighting and in its original form. This now forms part of our archive for this site, along with all the different stages of information that went into producing and explaining it, allowing a far greater level of understanding and detail for future users of our archive than ever been possible previously. Lastly, in addition to records about individual sites, we produce and archive information relating to thematic architectural projects. Cymru Newtown has been the subject of a recent study as Wales's only Mark I new town. As part of this project, we have undertaken detailed research, including at a range of other archives, and utilised our extensive collection of historic ordnance survey mapping to chart the changes in planning and development of the designated area of the new town. This has led to the upgrading or creation of over 60 Covline records with a wealth of new photographic archive taken during the course of the study. The result of this research, including archive images, historic mapping and photography, has been brought together in a characterisation report which will be available as a digital download and archived within the National Monuments Record. Finally, all of our architectural collections are available to search via our online catalogue, Covline. So I hope that this small taste of the archives we hold will inspire you to come and see more of our information about the buildings of Wales. Thank you.